Frost crunches under Thaddeus's boots as he approaches the naked woman weeping at his fence. 12 years of solitude shatter with the sight of blood on her dirt-streaked knees. "Don't let them find me," she whispers, unaware of the dust cloud rising on the horizon. 3 riders, and Thaddeus's piece, closing in fast. Like glass. She was naked, pressed against the wooden posts, her body shaking with sobs that carried across the empty pasture. Dirt streaked her skin, and her dark hair hung in tangles around her face. Blood stained her knees and palms where she'd fallen. Thaddeus froze, the coffee mug trembling in his weathered hands. His first instinct was to retreat. People meant trouble. People brought complications he'd sworn off after Martha died, and the town turned their backs on him. But this woman, she wasn't standing at his gate, demanding something. She was clinging to his fence like it was the only thing keeping her from drowning. That sat down his coffee and walked slowly across the yard, his boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. The woman didn't notice him at first, too lost in her terror to hear his approach. When she finally looked up, her green eyes were wild with fear and exhaustion. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw, "don't let them find me." The words hit him like a punch to the chest. Them. Someone had done this to her. Someone had stripped her of everything, including her dignity, and sent her running into the wilderness. That glance toward the horizon, half expecting to see riders coming after her. "Who's after you?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle despite the rage building in his gut. She shook her head frantically. "I can't. They'll kill me if they find me. They'll kill us both." That studied her face, searching for lies or manipulation. All he saw was genuine terror. After 12 years of avoiding human contact, every instinct told him to send her away, to protect the peace he'd built from the ashes of his old life. But looking at her now, broken and begging, he couldn't walk away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Magnolia," she whispered. He nodded once. "I'm Thaddeus. Come inside. We'll figure this out." As he helped her to her feet, wrapping his coat around her trembling shoulders, Thaddeus caught sight of dust clouds on the distant ridge, 3 riders moving fast in their direction. His blood turned cold as he realized the choice he just made might cost them both their lives. The riders were getting closer, and Magnolia's past was about to catch up with them both. That slammed the door behind them and immediately moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The riders were still a mile out, but closing fast. Magnolia stood in the center of his small cabin, clutching his coat around herself, her eyes darting between the walls like a trapped animal. "They're coming, aren't they?" she whispered. 3 of them, Thaddeus confirmed, his mind racing. "Who are they?" Magnolia's face crumpled. "Colt Devlin's men. He owns the saloon in Copper Ridge. Owns half the town." "Really?" Her voice broke. He bought me from my husband's debts. Said I belong to him now." The word sent a cold fury through Thaddeus's veins. He'd heard stories about men like Devlin, predators who used debt and desperation to trap women in situations worse than slavery. But hearing it from Magnolia, seeing the shame in her eyes, made it real in a way that burned. "You escaped," he said. She nodded. "Last night, Colt was going to share me with his business partners to seal some deal." The words came out like poison she needed to spit up. "I broke a window and ran. Been running all night." Thaddeus grabbed his rifle from above the fireplace and checked the cartridge. 6 shots against 3 professional gunmen. It might not be enough, but it would have to do. He hadn't survived 12 years of isolation by backing down from a fight. "There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen," he said, pointing to a trap door hidden under a rug. "Get down there and don't come out no matter what you hear." Magnolia grabbed his arm. "They'll kill you. Colt doesn't leave witnesses." "Maybe," Thaddeus said, surprised by how calm he felt. "But they're not taking you back." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, thundering across his property like a storm. Thaddeus positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. He thought about Martha, about the promise he'd made at her grave to never get involved in other people's troubles again. But looking at Magnolia disappearing into the cellar, he realized some promises were meant to be broken. The riders pulled up hard in front of his cabin, their horses snorting and stamping. The man in front wore a black vest and had cold eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. That recognized the type, Dellen's enforcer, the kind of man who enjoyed causing pain. "Morning," the enforcer called out. "Name's Pike. We're looking for something that belongs to our employer. You seen a woman come through here?" That stepped onto his porch, rifle held casual but ready. "Lots of women in these parts. You'll have to be more specific." Pike's smile was sharp as a blade. "Pretty little thing. Dark hair, might not have been wearing much clothing." His eyes swept over the cabin, noting the second coffee cup on the porch railing. "Funny thing is, her tracks lead right to your door." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. Thaddeus knew the next words out of his mouth would determine whether they all walked away from this alive. "Tracks can be deceiving," Thaddeus said, his finger resting on the rifle's trigger, especially after a hard rain last night. Pike's eyes narrowed. He knew there hadn't been any rain. They all knew it, but the game had to be played, at least for now. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Just to be thorough." "I do mind," Thaddeus replied. "This is private property." The two men flanking Pike shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward their guns. Thaddeus recognized the setup. They'd done this before. Pike would keep talking while his men got into position. Then they'd take what they wanted and leave no witnesses. "Now see, that's where you're wrong," Pike said, dismounting slowly. "Colt Devlin has an arrangement with the sheriff. Makes this official business." He pulled a crumpled paper from his vest. "Warrant to search for stolen property." Thaddeus didn't need to read it to know it was fake. In towns like Copper Ridge, men like Devlin wrote their own laws, but the paper gave Pike's men the excuse they needed to draw their weapons. "Stolen property?" Thaddeus asked, buying time. "What exactly are you claiming was stolen?" "Couple thousand worth of services." Pike grinned. "Plus, she assaulted Mr. Devlin when she broke his window." "That's destruction of property and battery?" The rage that had been simmering in Thaddeus's chest finally boiled over. These men spoke about Magnolia like she was livestock, like her suffering was just a business transaction. He thought about the terror in her eyes, the blood on her knees from her desperate escape. "Services?" he repeated flatly. Pike's grin widened. "Now you're understanding, so why don't you step aside and let us collect what's ours? Make this easy on everyone." Thaddeus raised his rifle. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back on your horses and ride out of here. Don't come back." The two mounted men drew their guns simultaneously, but Thaddeus was already moving. His first shot took the man on the left out of his saddle before the gunman could clear leather. The second shot shattered the other rider's shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol flying. Pike dove behind his horse, pulling his own weapon. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, old man." Bullets splintered the porch posts around Thaddeus as he rolled behind a water trough. 4 shots left in his rifle. Pike was still mobile and angry, and there was no telling if these 3 had backup coming. But as he heard Magnolia's muffled crying from the cellar below, Thaddeus knew he'd made the right choice. The war for Magnolia's freedom had begun, and one way or another, it would end today. Pike's horse reared and bolted, leaving the enforcer exposed in the middle of the yard. He scrambled toward the overturned wagon near the barn, bullets from Thaddeus's rifle chasing his heels. The wounded rider groaned in the dirt, clutching his shattered shoulder while his dead companion stared sightlessly at the morning sky. "This ain't over," Pike shouted from behind the wagon. "Devlin's got 20 men. You can't fight them all." Thaddeus knew Pike was right. Even if he won this gunfight, more would come. Devlin wouldn't let the insult stand, especially not over a woman he considered his property. But as Thaddeus looked at the trap door concealing Magnolia, he realized he was past the point of backing down. "Then he better bring all 20, Thaddeus called back. Pike fired 3 quick shots, splintering the wood inches from Thaddeus's head. But the enforcer was pinned down now, and they both knew it. The question was, who would run out of ammunition first? That's when Thaddeus heard the cellar door creak open behind him. "Don't," he warned without turning around. "Stay hidden." But Magnolia's voice was steady now, stronger than before. The wounded one. "I know him. That's Ezra Kane." Thaddeus risked a glance back. Magnolia had pulled on one of his shirts, and her face had hardened with something beyond fear, recognition, and hatred. He was there the night Colt first. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. He held me down while Colt explained what I owed. The wounded man, Ezra, was trying to crawl toward his dropped pistol. Blood leaked between his fingers, but he was still dangerous. Thaddeus couldn't watch both him and Pike at the same time. If you were Thaddeus, what would you do? Trust Magnolia to handle Ezra while you dealt with Pike? Or risk everything to keep her protected and fight both men yourself? Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you choose because what Thaddeus decided next would determine whether they lived to see sunset. Thaddeus made his choice. He slid his backup pistol across the floor to Magnolia. You know how to use this? Her hands shook as she picked up the weapon, but her voice was ice. Colt made sure I learned, said a woman should know how to protect his investment. Pike chose that moment to make his move, sprinting from the wagon toward the cabin. Thaddeus swung his rifle around, but Pike was fast and desperate. The enforcer's shot went wide, but it was close enough to make Thaddeus duck. Behind him, he heard the rash of a pistol in Ezra's panicked voice. Wait, Magnolia, please! The gunshot was deafening in the small space. When Thaddeus looked back, Ezra was still, and Magnolia was standing over him with tears streaming down her face. That's for Sarah, she whispered to the dead man, and Mary and all the others. Pike's voice cracked with rage. You killed Ezra. Devlin's going to skin you both alive. But something had changed in the air. The desperation was gone, replaced by cold determination. Magnolia wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a survivor who'd found her teeth. Pike's desperation made him reckless. He charged the cabin, firing wildly as he ran. Thaddeus dropped him with a single shot to the chest, but not before Pike's last bullet found its mark. Fire erupted along Thaddeus's left arm as the bullet grazed bone. The sudden silence was deafening. 3 men lay dead in his yard, their blood soaking into the earth he'd kept peaceful for 12 years. Thaddeus pressed his hand against the wound, feeling the warm wetness seep between his fingers. You're hurt, Magnolia said, rushing to his side. It's nothing, Thaddeus lied, though his vision was starting to blur. We need to move. Pike wasn't lying about Dellin's men. Magnolia tore strips from his shirt, binding the wound with practiced efficiency. I've done this before, she said quietly. Colt's girls. We took care of each other when we could. As she worked, Thaddeus studied her face. The terrified woman who'd clung to his fence was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who'd survived hell and learned to fight back. It should have worried him, but instead he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, respect for another human being. There's something else, Magnolia said, her hand stilling on the bandage. Pike mentioned 20 men. But that's not the worst part. Dellin doesn't just own the saloon, he's got a deal with the railroad company. They're buying up all the land in this valley for a new line. The words hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. This land? She nodded. Your ranch sits right in the middle of their planned route. They've been trying to force people out for months, but nobody would sell. So Devlin started applying pressure. The other ranchers dead or driven off. You're the last one, Thaddeus. They were probably coming for you anyway. Her green eyes met his. I just gave them an excuse to do it today. The full picture crystallized in Thaddeus's mind. This wasn't just about recovering stolen property. Devlin had been planning to take his land, and Magnolia's escape had given him the perfect justification for violence. Now Thaddeus understood why the fake warrant, why Pike had been so confident. How long before Devlin gets here with the rest of his men? He asked. Magnolia glanced at the sun, calculating. 2 hours, maybe 3. Pike was supposed to signal when he found me. That looked around his cabin at the life he'd built from nothing. Every board, every nail, every fence post represented years of backbreaking work. This land was all he had left of Martha, the only thing that gave his existence meaning. But now he had a choice: run and lose everything he'd built, or stay and face 20 professional killers with a wounded arm and a woman who'd already suffered enough. The sound of distant hoof-beat-tats echoed across the valley, and Thaddeus realized the choice might already be made for them. The hoof-beat-tats weren't coming from the direction of Copper Ridge. Thaddeus squinted through his rifle scope and felt his heart sink. 8 riders approached from the east, moving fast and purposeful. But these weren't Devlin's men. Cavalry. He breathed. Magnolia's face went white. Oh, God. Colt must have sent word to Fort Henderson. Told them I was an escaped criminal or Indian sympathizer or something. That lowered his rifle. Fighting corrupt businessmen was one thing, but firing on federal soldiers was treason. Even if these men were operating on false information, they wore the uniform of the United States Army. "What do we do?" Magnolia whispered. Before Thaddeus could answer, the soldiers spread out in a semicircle around his property. Their leader, a young lieutenant with hard eyes, rode forward alone. His hand rested casually on his saber, but Thaddeus noticed the cavalry carbines the other men carried. "I'm Lieutenant Morrison," the officer called out. "We've received reports of an escaped criminal hiding on these premises. Federal fugitive wanted for theft and assault." "What's the fugitive's name?" Thaddeus asked, stepping onto his porch. "Magnolia Hayes also goes by Magnolia Devlin." According to our information, the lie was so smoothly delivered that Thaddeus almost believed it himself. Devlin had covered all his bases, turning local corruption into federal authority. Now, Magnolia wasn't just running from criminals. She was running from the law itself. "Haven't seen anyone by that name," Thaddeus said. Lieutenant Morrison's eyes swept over the 3 bodies in the yard. "Looks like you've had some trouble here." "Mr. Crane." "Thaddeus Crane. Those men tried to rob me. I defended my property, 3 against 1. That's some impressive shooting, Mr. Crane." Morrison dismounted, his hand now gripping his saber handle. "Mind if we search the premises?" "Just routine when investigating federal fugitives." Thaddeus knew he couldn't refuse without confirming their suspicions, but he also knew that the moment they found Magnolia, she'd disappear into military custody and end up back in Devlin's hands through legal channels. "Of course," he said. "Though I should warn you, I live alone. Have for years." Morrison nodded to his men. 4 soldiers dismounted and began searching the barn and outbuildings. It would only be minutes before they found the cellar entrance. Inside the cabin, Magnolia pressed herself against the wall beside the door, clutching the pistol. Thaddeus could see her through the window, trapped like an animal. If the soldiers found her armed, they'd shoot first and ask questions later. "Tell me about these men," Morrison said, nudging Pike's body with his boot. "You recognize them." "Drifters," Thaddeus lied. "Said they were looking for work, but they were sizing up my place for a robbery." "Funny thing," Morrison said conversationally. "We got word from Copper Ridge that 3 of Colt Devlin's men rode out this way this morning. Hasn't come back." The trap was closing. Morrison knew exactly who the dead men were, which meant he knew exactly why they'd come. The federal warrant was just a convenient fiction to give Devlin's revenge the color of law. A shout came from inside the cabin. "Lieutenant, found something?" Morrison smiled coldly. "Looks like your story just fell apart, Mr. Crane." The soldier emerged from the cabin holding one of Thaddeus's shirts, the one Magnolia had been wearing. Blood stained the fabric where she'd bandaged his wound. Morrison examined it with the satisfaction of a man who just won a difficult hand of poker. "Blood's still wet," the soldier reported. "And there's a trap pour in the kitchen floor. Looks like someone was hiding down there recently." Morrison's eyes never left Thaddeus's face. "So where is she now, Mr. Crane?" Thaddeus's mind raced. The cellar was empty, which meant Magnolia had somehow slipped out during the search. But where could she go? His property was surrounded by open grassland for miles, unless the old mine shaft. Martha had shown it to him years ago, a played-out silver claim hidden in the rocky outcrop behind his barn. It was dangerous, half-collapsed and snake-infested, but it would provide cover. "I told you," Thaddeus said, "I live alone." Morrison backhanded him across the face, the blow sharp and unexpected. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harboring a federal fugitive is a hanging offense." Blood trickled from Thaddeus's split lip, but he held the lieutenant's stare. "Then I guess you better find your fugitive first." That's when the shooting started. The crack of a rifle echoed from the rocks behind the barn. One of Morrison's men spun and dropped, clutching his leg. The other soldiers dove for cover, scanning the outcrop for the shooter. "She's in the rocks," someone shouted. Morrison drew his saber and pressed it against Thaddeus's throat. "Call her out, or I'll open you up right here." But Thaddeus was smiling now, despite the blade at his neck. Magnolia wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting smart. From the mine shaft, she had excellent cover in a clear field of fire. The soldiers would have to expose themselves to root her out. Another shot rang out, this one closer. A soldier yelped and scrambled behind a water trough. Nolia was moving, using the mine's multiple entrances to stay ahead of their return fire. "She's got the high ground," Thaddeus said calmly, "and she knows these rocks better than your men do. How many soldiers are you willing to lose for Colt Devlin's money?" Morrison's face flushed red. "This is about law and order. This is about a railroad route and a corrupt businessman who owns you," Thaddeus replied. "How much is Devlin paying you to wear that uniform while you do his dirty work?" The saber pressed deeper, drawing blood. But Morrison's hand was shaking now, and they both knew it. The careful facade was crumbling, revealing the mercenary underneath the federal authority. From the rocks came Magnolia's voice, clear and strong. "I've got 6 more shots and all day to use them. How badly do you want me, Lieutenant?" Morrison's hand trembled against the saber. Around him, his men crouched behind whatever cover they could find, pinned down by a woman they couldn't see. The careful military operation had devolved into a siege, and they were losing. "Stand down," Morrison shouted toward the rocks. "You're only making this worse for yourself." Magnolia's laughter echoed off the stone walls. "Worse? You mean there's something worse than being Colt Devlin's property?" Another shot cracked out, and the soldier behind the water trough cursed as splinters flew past his head. Magnolia wasn't trying to kill them. She was making a point. She could have dropped half of Morrison's men by now if she'd wanted to. "She's playing with us," one of the soldiers muttered. Morrison pressed the saber deeper into Thaddeus's neck. "Call her down, or so help me." "Lieutenant Morrison!" The voice came from behind them. Morrison spun around to see an older man in a colonel's uniform, riding hard toward the ranch. The lieutenant's face went white as he recognized his commanding officer. "Colonel Hartwell." Morrison stammered, lowering his weapon. Colonel Hartwell dismounted, his eyes taking in the scene. Dead civilians, soldiers pinned down by sniper fire, and a lieutenant holding a blade to an unarmed rancher's throat. His expression darkened with each detail. "What in God's name is happening here, Lieutenant?" "Sir, we're pursuing a federal fugitive." Intelligence from Copper Ridge indicated. "Intelligence from Colt Devlin, you mean?" Hartwell's voice was ice. "Did you think I wouldn't find out about your little arrangement with that snake?" Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Sir, I don't know what you mean. I mean the $2,000 in railroad money found in your quarters last night. I mean the forged federal warrants. I mean the systematic abuse of military authority for corporate profit." Hartwell stepped closer. "Did you really think you could use my soldiers as private mercenaries without consequences?" From the rocks, Magnolia called out, "Colonel, are you here to arrest me too?" Hartwell looked toward the outcrop. "No, miss. I'm here to arrest the men who've been using federal badges to commit crimes in your territory." The relief that washed over Thaddeus was almost overwhelming, but it was nothing compared to the sound that came from the mineshaft. Something between a sob and a laugh. The sound of a woman who'd been running for so long, she'd forgotten what safety felt like. Morrison made one last desperate play, lunging for his drop pistol. Thaddeus kicked it away and drove his fist into the lieutenant's face, dropping him to the ground. 12 years of isolation and rage poured into that punch. "That's for Martha," he growled, "and for every woman Devlin's hurt." Magnolia emerged from the rocks 20 minutes later, the rifle slung over her shoulder and tears streaming down her face. She walked straight to Thaddeus and collapsed into his arms, finally allowing herself to believe she was free. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "You're safe now." Colonel Hartwell arrested Morrison and 3 of his men on charges of corruption and abuse of authority. The other soldiers who'd believed they were following legitimate orders were reassigned. Devlin himself was taken into custody when federal marshals raided Copper Ridge the next day. 6 months later, Thaddeus and Magnolia stood on the porch of their rebuilt cabin, watching the sunset paint the valley gold. She wore a simple white dress, and he wore his best shirt. The preacher from the next county over had just pronounced them husband and wife. "No more running," she said, taking his hand. "No more hiding," he agreed. The railroad never did build their line through the valley. Turns out their surveyors' reports had been falsified to inflate the land's value. But Thaddeus and Magnolia didn't mind. They'd found something worth more than all the railroad money in the world. They'd found each other. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful you won't forget it anytime soon. Click on the video.